Hey, hello. I kind of wanted to start this off with a little bit of a description of why I'm talking about this particular topic and why difficult conversations are so important to me. It kind of starts right at the beginning of my career. I had the misfortune of becoming a leader incredibly early. And I say misfortune because I had no idea what I was doing. By the time I was 23 years old, I was running a team of 10 people. What 23-year-old knows how to be an employee, let alone be a leader? And I made a whole heap of mistakes. And two mistakes that I made within quick succession are related to difficult conversations that we have and how they're pivotal in our careers and how they kind of have an impact throughout the whole of our lives. And one of them was I'd hired somebody who was an excellent engineer. She was absolutely incredible, but she didn't fit in with the team. It was a massive culture clash. And in typical English fashion, I didn't say anything. I kind of just closed my mouth and let things go on. And I ended up losing my best engineer because of this culture clash. And so I'd hired one person who wasn't the right fit, and by not speaking up, I lost another person who was the right fit. That was a difficult conversation I didn't have. About a week later, my boss pulled me into a meeting room and said to me, "Andrew, what's your job?" When your boss pulls you in a meeting room and asks you what your job is, that's never a good sign. This isn't going to be a fun, happy conversation. This is going to be a difficult conversation. And so my boss asked me, "What's your job?" And I said, "To write code." And he said, "No, Andrew, you're the lead engineer. What's your job? What's your job as a lead engineer?" And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, "To write really good code." Nah. That wasn't the answer he was wanting. And this could be a story of me getting fired. This could be a story of me walking away from this job. But luckily for me, it ended up being the start of a coaching relationship between me and this boss. And he taught me a lot about being a leader and a lot about what it meant to focus on those things that are outside of your own contributions and how you can help other people. So this is the story of two difficult conversations. The one that I didn't have, that resulted in a really big mistake, and one that my boss had, which resulted in me starting to be his coachee. And so difficult conversations for me have kind of been this thing that has stuck throughout my entire career as these pivotal moments. And they're also incredibly important in our personal lives. So that's why I put this talk together, because I genuinely believe that our success in our lives, personal or professional, are directly proportional to the number of difficult conversations that we have in them. So this is what we're going to go through tonight. We're going to go through the what and the why of difficult conversations. What are they? Why should we have them? I'm going to take you through the mindset and preparation that's important in being effective in having them. And we'll go through some models, worksheets, and examples, and a little bit of Q&A at the end. I think we might run out of time for the Q&A. That's my fault. Apologies if we do, because I just like to talk. If we do, please come chat to me afterwards. Okay, so who am I, this person stood in front of you? I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens. I'm a long-term father of a flock of humans, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love travel, I love getting out there, and I love seeing the world, hence why I now live in Australia. From a professional point of view, I've been coding for about 20 years at this point. Been, like I said, a tech leader incredibly early in my journey, but I've kind of the last few years I've kind of pivoted and focused more on teaching and training leadership skills, because like Bob said, in our industry we've got a huge problem. We have so many great smart engineers that just really struggle to understand the difference between being a great individual contributor and being a great leader. And so I founded Tech Leaders Launchpad to solve that problem. Okay. What are difficult conversations? All conversations. Depends if you're an extrovert or an introvert, I guess. Depends whether you're speaking in your mother tongue. There's a lot of things that could be difficult conversations. The way that I like to think about them are things that have high stakes or high emotions associated with them. They're either something which you're going to go into that, and there's the impact of that conversation is going to be big in terms of what happens afterwards, or your emotional state during and after the conversation. That's kind of my definition of a difficult conversation. And so we think about some of those. They're things like giving feedback, telling somebody the quality of their work isn't good enough, or telling somebody that their professional behavior isn't good enough. They're things like asking for promotion, like going and trying to persuade somebody why they should give you that role that you deserve, or give you that pay rise that you deserve. And then the other side of that is saying no, why you shouldn't get that promotion, and why you haven't met the markers. These are high stakes, high emotion situations. But there could be other things as well. Like I said, I'm an introvert. Standing up on stage giving this presentation for me is incredibly difficult. This is not something that comes naturally to me at all. And so it's a difficult conversation for me because there's high emotions associated with it. But there's some other things as well that we might not think of, such as architectural decision making. If you're going into a discussion with a group of people about whether or not you should implement a particular approach, or what library you should use, or what back-end infrastructure you should use, there could be high emotions associated with that, and there's definitely high stakes. And so they can be difficult conversations as well. And lastly, there's a bunch on this slide, but I'm just going to touch on one more, which is interviewing. Either being interviewed or interviewing somebody else. You might not think it if you're hunting for a job, but the person on the other side of the Zoom call or the other side of the table is probably just as charged by the conversation as you are. I've interviewed hundreds of people in my career, and it's still a difficult conversation for me as somebody interviewing somebody else. There's high emotions involved. Am I going to disappoint this person? Are they the right fit? Am I going to find that person that I've been hunting for? And there's obviously high stakes involved because hiring is a high stakes environment. So when you're thinking about difficult conversations, I want you to use this as your mental reference. Are there high stakes? Are there high emotions? Because these are the things that drive difficult conversations. And so if that's what they are, why do this talk? Why am I talking about difficult conversations? Well, what happens if we don't have them? What happens if we don't have a difficult conversation? Somebody shouts something out. Nothing. Yes, it's a really, really great point. Normally what people say at this point is nothing, because you're absolutely right. If you don't have a difficult conversation, nothing can happen. There's something else though. What happens if you don't have a difficult conversation? What's even worse than nothing happening? Something really bad. Yeah, things could get worse. So I normally go into a tirade at this point about my beloved Land Rover. I'm going to try and keep this talk short and not spend 20 minutes talking about it. But this is my pride, or was my pride and joy. It's genuinely my one regret moving to Australia, is that I had to leave this Land Rover behind. It was one of those cars. I'm not a car person, but just walking past this car made me smile, knowing that I owned it. It's a huge regret. Anyway, this talk is not about me. It's about difficult conversations. So this Land Rover was a vehicle that I toured all the way around Europe. We used to get on the ferry from the UK, and I'd just drive around Europe for a week, and then I'd come back. Amazing, going to France, Germany, Luxembourg, just everywhere. This one particular trip, I went to the Land Rover, and I always do a pre-check just to make sure nothing's having an issue. So I'm doing my pre-check, and I look on the floor, on the road under the Land Rover, and there's oil on the floor under the Land Rover. Now, for those of you who don't know Land Rovers, that's not necessarily a problem. If it doesn't leak, you've probably got a problem in that there's no oil in it. So as a Land Rover, a little bit of oil leaking isn't a huge problem. but there was a little bit more than I expected. Typical English fashion, I'll be fine. Get in the car, go off on my journey. Driving down the French motorway, and I start hearing this. Take the engine off, don't hear anything, start driving again. Okay, fair enough. Be fine. Keep driving, going down the Luxembourg highway. Grinding noises come from under the vehicle. I think I should probably stop now. And as that thought crosses my mind, the whole wheels lock up and the car skids to a stop from 120 kilometers an hour to 0. So, I'm in Luxembourg, in the highway, but I'm fortunate. I'm actually genuinely fortunate at this point. Everybody's safe. There's not a problem. Not only that, but I break down 1 mile from a Land Rover specialist garage. Very, very lucky. Not only that, they have the exact part I need to fix my car. Genuinely very lucky circumstance. But they know they're the only garage in 100 miles that can fix my problem. And they know I've got a car that doesn't work. Do you know how much I paid to fix my Land Rover on a Luxembourg highway? 18,000 euros. What choice did I have? Getting it towed back to the UK would have cost me more. So I had to pay it. Do you know how much it would have cost if I'd have fixed it when I saw the oil on the floor in the UK? About $30 for some oil. Do you know how much it would have cost to fix it when I heard that knocking noise when I was on the French motorway? Probably $100 of gears and another couple of $100 of labor. So, I didn't respond to that, and it cost me that much money. Why am I telling this story? What have Land Rovers got to do with difficult conversations? Because this is what happens if you ignore difficult conversations. Sometimes nothing happens. Often things get worse. We've all had these situations where we're approaching something, we know this is going to be a difficult conversation, and we shy away from it. We don't want to have the difficult conversation, and so we don't have it. We make up excuses why we're not going to do it. Or things will get better by themselves. That person, they'll just leave and then I won't have to deal with it. You know, they're going to quit anyway. It's fine. I don't need to deal with it. Or somebody else will do it for me. And yet, every time we have this delay tactic on difficult conversations, things don't get better by themselves. Either nothing happens or they get worse. And so the next time you're seeing a difficult conversation in the future, when you feel it brewing, when you see that oil dripping on the ground, and you're asking yourself, should you tackle this problem now? I want you to think of me in a garage in Luxembourg, crying as I hand over my credit card. Because the same thing's going to happen to you if you ignore a difficult conversation. Okay, but the last thing I want to touch with this, before we kind of get into the meat of what I'm going to talk about, is part of what I do as a job is I do training courses. So I come into companies and I teach this kind of stuff for companies. And one of the things that people say to me when I teach this stuff is, okay, great, are you going to teach me to be comfortable telling somebody that their code sucks? Are you going to teach me that I'm going to be comfortable interviewing somebody? Are you going to teach me that I'm going to be comfortable telling somebody that they're fired? No. Because comfort means you've lost the connection with the person on the other side of the table. Comfort means you're not being empathetic. Comfort means you don't care. The emotional stakes for you are gone. And so I never want you to be comfortable going into those conversations. I want you to be confident going into them, which is a different concept. Being confident, feeling like you're in the right place to have it, that you're in the right mental state, you're prepared for it, but not comfortable. Because if I'm going into a performance conversation with somebody, if I'm telling them that the way they're doing the thing they're doing is not right, and I'm comfortable, I've lost that emotional connection. I don't care about the person anymore. And so I encourage you, be confident, not comfortable. Okay, let's move on to the meat of actually telling you. I've told you what difficult conversations are. I've told you why they're important. Let's tell you how to actually deal with them. The two words I want you to go through your mind when you see a difficult conversation that you're approaching is mindset and preparation. So mindset. This is the way we're thinking about the conversation. It's the internal narrative that we tell ourselves about what's happening. It's the way that we can encourage ourselves to actually have the conversation. And often a lot of mindset comes down to courage. The courage to actually have the conversation. Again, back to me on the highway crying with a credit card. Because if we don't have those things happen. And so, courage being the most important thing, what is some of the things that can challenge our courage to have difficult conversations? Somebody want to shout something out? Why might we shy away from them? Anxiety, yeah, definitely. Anybody else?
The person we have to talk to is mean.
The person we have to talk to is mean, was what was said. One last one.
Consequences.
Ooh, consequences. Tell me more about consequences.
Too much at stake. Yeah.
Too much at stake. Yeah, definitely. There's one other thing that kind of encapsulates a lot of these different things, and it's imposter syndrome. I always try and find a way to get imposter syndrome into my talks because it's such a big thing in our industry, and this is the crux of a lot of what's happening when we shy away from these conversations, because we don't feel like we should be the one having these, or we don't feel like we're equipped enough to have these conversations, or we don't feel like we're in the right authority position to have those conversations, which is just ridiculous. But it's there, it's something we can feel. And the way I want you to get out of that is to ask yourself a few questions, to reframe your mindset, to get into a place where you have the courage to have the difficult conversations. And the first question I want you to ask yourself when you see this difficult conversation on the horizon is, why is it in my best interests to have this difficult conversation? I want to start with a little bit of selfishness. Let's talk about us for a minute. Let's talk about why it's in my best interest. Because this is one of the best ways to get over that initial hump of not having the courage to do it. So say, for example, let's pick a situation. Let's say I'm a junior and I'm behind on my projects. And I've not told anybody I'm behind. I've not told them that I'm stuck. And there was this ticket that I picked off the board. It said a day. I'm 4 days in. And I've not told anybody that not only am I 4 days into this ticket, but I'm stuck and I have no idea what to do. So why is it in my best interest to have this difficult conversation? I can come up with a whole heap of things here. Because I get to work on something new and different and interesting. Because I get to solve the problem that's really been annoying me. Because I want to be in a place where I'm learning and developing, and I want to know how to solve this problem. So there's a bunch of ways you can answer this question. Why is it in my best interest to have this conversation? Another question to ask is, why is it in the best interest of the other person? So if I'm having this discussion with the project manager or the delivery lead or the tech lead, whatever you have in your organization, well, it's in their best interest because they're making assumptions about my work and the things that I'm doing and the velocity and where we're going with this and the release schedules. Again, there's a bunch of ways I can answer this question of why it's in the other person's best interest. A tricky one, which for anybody wanting to step into leadership positions, this is a really great mental exercise, because part of moving into leadership is elevating the altitude of how you think about problems and trying to think in a more high level altitude. And so asking yourself, why is it in the best interest of my team to have this difficult conversation, is a great way to kind of practice that way of thinking. And in my example with the junior, it could be because maybe other people in my team are waiting for me to finish this so they can do their piece of work. Or it could be I want to have a culture in my team of everybody being open about where they are and how they've progressed and what blockers they've got. So again, there's a bunch of ways we can answer that. And then the highway credit card question. We start off with selfishness, we move to empathy for the other person, we move to a higher level altitude, let's end with some fear. What happens if I don't have this difficult conversation? So all of these questions are kind of geared towards giving you the courage to have the difficult conversation. It's meant to be a place where you can really gain that higher level understanding of why you're doing this, get through the fear, get through the imposter syndrome, and get yourself to actually talk to that person. But if you're talking to that person, then you then need to prepare yourself for that. You need to be in the right mental state, yes, but we also need to do the right preparation. And a question for the room, what things could happen in a difficult conversation that might be helped if we prepare better?
Lower the emotional stakes.
We could definitely lower the emotional stakes, 100% agree. Anybody else? Turn that question around. What happens if we don't prepare? What could go wrong if we don't prepare?
Oh, you're going to say something dumb.
You could say something dumb, yeah. Like what? Like, what's a good example or a good category of examples of a dumb thing you might say?
I was keen to the situation. If someone's not performing, the way that you kind of address that
Yeah,
might come across
yeah,
really condescending or nasty or negative or...
yeah, exactly. You could be condescending or nasty or negative if you don't prepare for it. Another thing that could happen is maybe they're just going to say something you didn't expect, and if you've not prepared for it and you've not thought about what they could say, you might not know how you can answer that. So there's a bunch of things that can be helped by better preparation. So the questions, I'm going to give you another series of questions to ask that should help you with the preparation. So gathering data and outside opinions. If you're going to say a fact, if you're going to give a piece of data when you're in a difficult conversation, you sure as hell better have that data right. You don't want to be saying something that is easily proven wrong. If you're using it as the reason behind the feedback you're giving, or the reason why you want to use a particular library or framework, you sure as hell better have the data correct if you're using it. But outside opinions can also be useful. Somebody, if you're making a value judgment on something, if you're saying, I think this thing because I think this other thing, then what are the other opinions? What other opinions can you gather from experts or from outside parties or people who are maybe not as emotionally invested in a situation? So spending the time gathering the data and the outside opinions means that you can more fully understand and be prepared for what somebody else might say during the conversation. We could also think through possible objections. So if I'm giving somebody some performance feedback, like say, for example, I work for a consultancy, and my colleague, every time he gets into the meeting, my colleague gets his phone out, kind of sits back a bit and plays with his phone for a little bit while the client's there. I might personally think that isn't the way that I think we should interact with clients. That's my opinion. So I could use this first thing of going, okay, well, I'm just going to speak to, before I kind of barrel into this and give this person this performance feedback, I'm just going to see what everybody else in the company thinks. I'm going to ask some people if this is acceptable behavior to them, and maybe ask my boss, maybe ask some peers. But I could also think through the objections that person could have. Like maybe they don't see why it's a problem. And so I can explain to them the impact of their behavior and why they're doing it. Or maybe they could be going, okay, well, actually, my wife is in hospital and I need to make sure. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. I get it. But maybe you could say that at the beginning of the meeting to the client and say, look, I've got a personal problem. I'm checking my phone. It's because of the personal problem. I apologize if that seems rude. So by thinking through these possible objections, you can find the different ways the conversation can go. And again, have multiple plans for those objections. Cool. Again, like I said, I teach this kind of stuff internally to organizations. And a lot of people at this point say to me, aren't you just manipulating the other person? Aren't you just spending all this time thinking about this and putting this together so that you can manipulate the other person? No. Manipulation is a state of mind, it's an intent, it's not a skill set. The skill set is influence, it's communication, it's these things that are skills, but they don't have a value judgment associated with the skills. The value judgment is on how you use it. I work a lot teaching people to be more influential with other people in their organization. So, how do you explain complex technical ideas to non-technical audiences? How do you convince other teams within your organization to use the libraries and frameworks that you think are the best fit? All of this stuff comes from a place of believing that your choice is the best choice for them and being open to the fact that it might not be. So the difference between influence and manipulation is convincing somebody to do something that isn't in their own interests. Influence is convincing them to do something that is, and being open to the fact that you might be wrong in that. And so if you're looking at this and getting this negative feeling that you don't want to learn these skills because you don't want to learn to manipulate, just push that down and understand that it's your state of mind and your intent is what is important here. All skills could be used negatively. Okay, so I want to give you something to take away, because the difficult part with a talk like this, especially something this short, is that I've just talked at you for 24 minutes. And you're going to leave this room and forget 95% of what I said. So I want to make sure that you remember the 95%. So I put together a little PDF. This PDF takes you through all of the questions that I've just talked about. When you see one of these difficult conversations on the horizon, you can use this PDF to remind you about the talk that I've just given and prepare and get in the right mindset for it. The other thing it's got is, so it's basically 3 pages. The last 2 pages are mindset and preparation. The first page asks you a couple of questions that I've not taken you through, which is the logistics of the difficult conversation, the what and the who of it. So the first part of it is to try and ask you to think about the difficult conversation in as objective way as possible, to try and take your emotions out of it and position it as objectively as possible, because that's how you're going to get in the best place to be in the right mindset. It also encourages you to think about who should be involved in the difficult conversation, because we want the right number of people there and nobody else. If I'm giving somebody performance feedback, I'm probably not going to do it in the middle of the stand-up on a Zoom call with everybody else. If I'm asking somebody to help me on something, I might do that in a more public forum or a more private forum, but at least let's think about it. So who will be involved in it? When should you have this difficult conversation? Generally not at 4:30 on a Friday. I worked for a boss, and I won't tell you who it is. He rang me up at 4:30 on a Friday when my wife was in hospital. And he knew my wife was in hospital because I'd signed off sick for that day. And he said to me, "Murph, I need you to ring so-and-so up and fire them." I was like, okay. No. No, I'm not doing that, because it's going to ruin their weekend. It's going to absolutely ruin their weekend. Talking to somebody about this type of stuff is just, it needs to be the right time, the right place, the right circumstance. And if you do that at 4:30 on a Friday, you're sending somebody into a spiral for the entire weekend. I was talking to somebody this lunchtime. I had lunch with somebody, and he told me that he had a phone call just before he got on a flight to tell him that his role was being made redundant. And this was a flight that was a 14-hour flight from Abu Dhabi to Melbourne. You can imagine those 14 hours did not go well for him. So thinking about when you have these conversations is just as important as how you have them, because they're crucial to getting that other person in the right mental state. I left that job, by the way. The week afterwards, I handed my notice in, because that is not the type of boss I want to work for. Where is also important, because should you do it on Zoom? Should you do it in a private meeting room? Should you do it in, like, there's all of these logistics around it are important. And then, like I said, the next couple of pages are all the questions that I've taken you through. So the mindset questions of why is it in my best interest? Why is it in theirs? Why is it, in the interest of the team? What will happen if I don't have it? The preparation questions of data and opinions and objections and ways this could go awry. So the next time you're having a difficult conversation, I really want you to take a step back, think about it, think about the logistics, think about the mindset, think about the preparation, and the question, if you have the courage to have it, and if you don't have the courage, why? What are the things that are holding you back? And how can you get over those? And lastly, focus on being confident, not comfortable. Remember, we don't want to be comfortable because we've lost empathy for the other person. Cool. So lastly, I just want to quickly mention this before we move to the end slide. If you want to know more about Tech Leaders Launchpad, the type of stuff we're doing, and the training courses we're building, there's a big, lovely QR code there. And that's it. Thank you. There's a few links on there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's the one on the right. If you want to learn more about Tech Leaders Launchpad, the one on the left, and the one on the middle is the worksheet QR code if you missed it earlier.
Did anybody have any questions? I can see a few people with their phones out taking photos of QR codes.
I can post all the links to the Slack as well. So join the Slack.
No questions? Oh, sorry. I was looking this way.
Hey, thanks for the really good talk. Very encouraging. My question is, what happens if a difficult conversation goes wrong?
Yeah. So this is a great question. Hopefully, in that process of preparing the mindset and the data and the opinions and everything, you're thinking through some of the ways it can go wrong, and you're hopefully anticipating those. So most of the time when it goes wrong, you should have a plan. When something happens that you haven't anticipated, I think it's important that you understand the why behind why you're doing the conversation, because then you can work with the other person to kind of get the best outcome. If you haven't done that work in the beginning of why this is important and the outcomes you want from it, and why it's important to you, why it's important to them, as soon as it goes awry, you kind of get lost in the weeds of what you're actually trying to accomplish, and you can sometimes start arguing minutiae. Whereas actually having that situation where you've thought and you've taken that step back and you've asked yourself what you're trying to achieve by this can keep you kind of directed of the conversation of where it's productive to end up.
Yep. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned something interesting in that being working with the other person in order to have a conversation that produces a good outcome. What if the other person isn't willing to work?
Yeah, so this is where that second question is really important, of why it's in their best interest to have it. This is something that not only helps you get over the courage sometimes to have the conversation in the first place and kind of be in that mental state to have it, it can also be a great way to show the other person why they should be involved and engaged in the conversation. So this is kind of back to the whole how do you influence somebody type discussion, and it's really difficult to influence somebody to do something that isn't in their best interests. And so, really spending that time to ask yourself and to analyze why it's in their best interests, you will be able to put together a compelling argument as to why they should engage with it in the first place.
Can you speak a little bit to the format of the Tech Leaders Launchpad, like how
Sure.
how it works?
Sure. Yeah. So think of it as plural site, but instead of technical skills, it's leadership skills. So you pay a fee, you get access to a whole curriculum which is based on everything that new leaders need within their first kind of year of leadership. So the mindsets that are effective for new leaders, the skill sets that are needed, learning things like personal productivity, the difference between being accountable and responsible for work, delegating efficiently, communicating with their peers, influencing people, giving performance feedback, like all of the things that, when I was a leader, I wish I knew. And I just had to learn through like just trial and error and the great people around me. I just wanted to have one place that kind of put all of that together.
So it's an asynchronous kind of
Yes.
course-based structure rather than a mentorship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where part of what I want to build off the back of it is a community, and part of that community will have mentorship as an element. That doesn't exist yet, but it's my aspirations to build it, and I will be building it.
Thank you.
Question. Did you, while preparing for presentation, think about the possible outcomes and apply your own methodology while preparing for this, labeling yourself an introvert?
Sorry, I couldn't actually hear the
Did
full
you
question.
did you go through your own process while preparing the presentation?
Oh, did I go through my own process while preparing for this presentation? Yes, I did. I also used another one of my techniques, which is about how do you communicate effectively, which is to break something down into what do you want people to feel, what do you want them to think, and what do you want them to do after the communication. And so I used that with this particular talk of like, what did I want you to do, and how did I want you to think about difficult conversations, and how did I want you to feel about them. So all of the techniques that I kind of teach, I use all the time, because they're genuinely the way that I think are the best way of doing this as an engineer, and using that algorithmic mindset that we have as engineers to kind of apply to people problems.
So if the person you have to have a difficult conversation with is say your boss, is there a better way of doing that than simply moving on to a different job?
So for the benefit of the online crowd, the question was, if the person you're having a difficult conversation with is your boss, how do you kind of handle that circumstance without losing your job? Influencing up is a skill which is a superpower that most people forget about, because we can just forget that actually our bosses don't know everything we know, and don't have the context that we have, and often are not privy to the day-to-days in the same way as we are. And so influencing up is definitely something that I encourage everybody to become better at. How you do that effectively is generally the same way that you do everything else, in that if you're approaching it with empathy and you're approaching it with an understanding that this is your point of view and you might be wrong, that's how you kind of get the best outcomes from that. Because most of the time your boss got their job because they're good at what they do, and so sometimes they're right, but also sometimes they're wrong. And going into it with that mindset of I believe that I'm right, but I'm open to being proved wrong, is the best way to kind of approach that without getting their back up and causing their own kind of ego to get in the way.
All right.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.